Let's talk about censorship and why Americans think they're not actually seeing the news. So, the number one comment I've been seeing in the last 24 hours is Americans saying, "Oh my God, they're not showing us the real news. We're not seeing the news. This is terrible. We're being censored." And then I saw a lot of other Americans saying, "No, they are showing this on the news. Why aren't you looking at the news?" So, let's have a little talk about it. Censorship is a very serious accusation. And it is something that we talk about when we talk about, like in China, there's certain things about state events and being careful, because I'm not sure if I can say this on this app, that when you are in China, you can't look up. They can't, they use WeChat a lot. There's certain apps they can't use. That is censorship. That is government controlling what you can and cannot know about. There is also a lot of what has happened in the past decade that I've seen, a lot of companies who are buying up news and then choosing to only put out the news that they like. John Oliver did an amazing, I will not even come close to doing the job that he did on this about Sinclair Media. Please go watch Last Week Tonight and the very well-researched piece that he did on that. I have been on the front lines of being in a newsroom that closed down because it was bought up by venture capitalists, which has become very popular in the last decade or so, and they've just been gutting newsrooms. So I also know that that can happen. But this is not the same as censorship. I think maybe a lot of people are also conflating censorship with censorship of the news and journalism with not seeing things on social media. Social media companies are private businesses, and they control what is in their community guidelines, to be perfectly frank. They are not journalistic sources. So when we talk about censorship, we need to be very specific. And I think what might also be happening here is people getting confused or not seeing it on their local news. So there's local news. I have local news too that just tells you like what's happened, what the accidents are, what's going on with your mayor. That's local news. The evening news where I live also, so it's local news for half an hour. You can also watch national news at a different time, which would be the rest of your country. So in Canada, I watch the global news at 6:00. That's my local news, but at 5 p.m. I can watch it and it would be my national news. But we also have to remember that news and journalists are not there to connect the dots for you. So the news will report the facts. Credible news sources will report the facts, but they aren't going to say, "Hey, remember that thing that happened 6 months ago? That's relevant to this thing. You should connect the dots about what your politicians are doing." They're not there to editorialize. And I think sometimes people conflate editorializing or opinions or op-eds with the news, and they're not the same. But there are fantastic journalists still out there around the world doing hard work, and you have access to them. But you also have to look for them. So this is something that I guess I just took for granted that other people did. Now, I grew up in a very heavy news household. My grandfather was the publisher of the Montreal Star. He was also the publisher of Weekend Magazine. Our family goes back in journalism to the 1700s. We had a press in England. We actually partially founded the Lancet, but we had a press in England, and then got in a little trouble for speaking against the king and brought the press over to Quebec and Trois-Rivières. It's a long story. It doesn't really matter. This is not about me. But my family was the type of family that we got a newspaper every morning and we watched the evening news every night. And that happened through the whole of my childhood. And I spent a lot of time with my grandfather, and we would watch PBS. We would watch the 12 o'clock news, and then we would watch the PBS McNeil and Lair News Hour. So that was just part of our daily routine. And then as I got older, when I was 7, I declared that I wanted to be a journalist. So I've always been interested in news. But as I got older, I read the paper and everything else. And in adulthood, I started making sure that every Sunday morning I tuned in to Fareed Zakaria. Was the show called GPS 360? Something like that. It's been a long day, but I would watch Fareed every Sunday morning, and he would interview Christopher Freeland before she was in politics, when she was a reporter for the Globe and Mail. He would interview Zbigniew Brzezinski, who I love dearly, dearly departed Zbigniew. He would interview these people, and I would make a point of every Sunday morning recording it on my DVR back then and watching it. Because a big part of being informed is seeking out the sources. The news is not going to come knocking down your door. If you want to be informed, you need to go out and look for the news. You need to be an avid news watcher. So a lot of people have also asked me for really good sources, people that they can follow or media that they should be following. So here is my personal recommendations as somebody who has grown up with the news, who was a journalist. This is what I would recommend. For Canada specifically, CBC. CBC is gold standard. They are a Canadian public broadcaster, and they have radio. They're French and English. They have web news. They have TikTok. They're everywhere. The CBC is everywhere. Follow the CBC. I personally also really like global news in Canada. That's my preference of a news channel. CTV is also reliable. And none of these three lean particularly in any heavy direction. For newspapers, there's a lot that I could recommend. If somebody wants a list of newspapers, that's a whole different thing. But I will tell you that I do subscribe to the Globe and Mail. I have been a long subscriber to the Globe and Mail. It's our national newspaper. I do not subscribe to the National Post. In fact, I will not even read the National Post because they are a little too conservative right-leaning for me, and I feel that the Globe and Mail is a lot more balanced in their reporting. Some people have asked me if we have the equivalent of Fox News. No, we don't. Fox News around the world is not considered news. It's considered political propaganda. So we do not have that here. I mean, we do have things like Rebel News, or Rebel Media, which you probably see in the US, but it is a white nationalist organization. It is not news. So no, we don't have any sort of on our networks news like that. I would also highly recommend the National Observer is a really good news source. The Tyee is from here out in British Columbia. It has a lot more environmental news if you're into that. Those are some of the ones that I would subscribe to. Also, if you're following along with Nitty online here on TikTok, they have a really great podcast I would highly recommend. Now, that is editorial, highly researched, but editorial, which is fair to say. They give their 2 cents. It's called The Tuesday Effect. I would recommend that for some really great deep dives on Canadian news. Internationally, I really like The Guardian. I find The Guardian has long been a good standard of news. They're very well respected. So that's who I would turn to in English language if you're looking in Britain for news. Not the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail is more of a tabloid, so not them. But go to The Guardian. The BBC is also really good. I mean, who doesn't love the BBC? I mean, I'm sure some people, but the BBC. But The Guardian, if you are looking for news articles, is the primary place where I look. But most importantly, I just have to say, I don't personally believe that your news is being censored, maybe to the level that a lot of people are getting really worked up about. I think maybe it's just that a lot of people don't really have a media diet that includes a variety of news from outside of their borders. And I've always been really big on international relations. If you are in the US, I also recommend, actually for anyone around the world, I would recommend Pod Save the World. Pod Save the UK is also really good for UK specific news, but Pod Save the World with Tommy Vitor. Tommy Vitor really knows what's up. I'm a little sad that they haven't really covered Canada more stringently recently, but they've been good about covering us in the past. So I would listen to Tommy and he would also have really good suggestions about mobilization, which I can't help you with that in your country. I don't really know what's going on the ground. So anyways, that's my very long ramble, but people ask me about my opinions and where to find news. Please curate a really good news diet. You will find it. It is out there. You have all the Google at your fingertips. Just go and get that. Make sure you're reading. As much as you can from credible sources. Also, Rolling Stone. Rolling Stone's been doing a pretty good job of holding power to account, so follow them too.